don't forget to like and subscribe. In October 1994, a chilling call was made to the police in a small town in North Carolina. A hunter, deep in the woods, had stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold, a human skeleton, partially covered in decaying remnants of fabric and clumps of what appeared to be dried meat. The grisly discovery was made in a secluded area, far from any well-traveled roads or hiking trails. The dense trees and overgrown underbrush made it an unlikely spot for anyone to wander by chance. Aside from a few pieces of tarnished jewelry and shreds of tattered clothing, there was little left to identify who this person once was. No identification was found near the remains, and there were no immediate clues suggesting how they had met their fate. However, one eerie detail stood out to investigators: an abandoned wasp's nest, intricately constructed inside the hollowed-out skull. Could this strange and unsettling detail hold the key to unraveling the mystery of who this person was, and how they had died? Detectives from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation were immediately called to the scene. They quickly determined that the remains were human, but with no flesh left on the bones, they had little to work with. The team of investigators scoured the area, taking in every detail, but there were no gunshot wounds on the skull, no signs of fractures or blunt force trauma on the long bones, and no immediately apparent evidence of a violent struggle. The skeletal remains were carefully collected and sent to one of the foremost experts in forensic anthropology, Dr. Richard Calloway. With decades of experience analyzing human remains, Dr. Calloway was a pioneer in reconstructing stories from the bones of the deceased. Using the pelvis, skull, and femur measurements, Dr. Calloway was able to determine that the remains belonged to a female, likely between 16 and 18 years old at the time of her death. Her bones showed no signs of disease or malnutrition, suggesting that she had been in good health before her untimely demise. Dr. Calloway noted that her bone structure was well developed for her age, and there were no signs of wear or injury that would have indicated a struggle prior to death. This led him to theorize that the young woman may have died in a sudden or unexpected way, possibly through something like poisoning or asphyxiation. But how had she died? There was no visible evidence of gunshots, stabbing, or physical trauma. However, there was one missing bone that could have provided an answer: the hyoid bone. This small, delicate bone in the neck often fractures during strangulation. Its absence meant that it could have been lost during decomposition, or it could indicate that she had been strangled to death. Yet, without the missing bone, the question remained: what had caused her death? While determining the cause of death was critical, investigators knew that identifying the young woman was the first step in solving the case. Dr. Calloway focused on a different clue: the abandoned wasp's nest found inside the skull. The nest was both strange and fascinating, offering an unusual link to the victim's time of death. He contacted Dr. Benjamin Larson, a forensic entomologist, to help analyze the nest. Wasps have distinct seasonal cycles, building their nests in dry, sheltered places during the warmer months and abandoning them as winter approaches. They are known to be highly territorial and often choose dark, secluded spaces to build their colonies. Dr. Larson examined the nest closely and estimated that it had been constructed in the late spring or early summer of 1994, meaning the skull had to have been completely clean and dry by that point. Since the soft tissue of a body decomposes within weeks in the humid North Carolina climate, this indicated that the victim had likely died at least 6 to 8 months prior, sometime in the fall or winter of 1993. With this information, investigators began searching through missing persons reports from that period, determined to find any connections to the young woman in the woods. They specifically focused on reports of teenage girls who had disappeared in the region. A breakthrough came when they cross-referenced the jewelry found at the scene. Among the items discovered was a distinctive silver bracelet and a delicate locket, both of which matched the description of jewelry worn by a missing local girl. A missing persons report from December 1993 detailed the disappearance of a 17-year-old girl named Rebecca Ann Collins. Rebecca had last been seen leaving a friend's house late one evening, and when she failed to return home, her family had reported her missing. At the time, authorities suspected she might have run away, but her family insisted that was unlikely. Rebecca's parents were adamant that she had been close to home, had no reason to leave, and had always been in touch with them. The most compelling piece of evidence was the description in the report. Rebecca had been wearing a distinctive silver bracelet and a delicate locket, both of which matched the items found near the skeletal remains. Dental records confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect: the remains belonged to Rebecca Ann Collins. The revelation was heartbreaking for her family, who had spent years hoping for any answers, but it also brought an eerie sense of closure to the case. However, it left law enforcement with more questions than answers. How had Rebecca died? Who had left her remains in the woods, and why? The absence of visible injuries on her body was puzzling, and without conclusive evidence, the cause of death remained elusive. Investigators were now certain she had been murdered, but the details surrounding her death, and the identity of the killer, continued to haunt them. With a confirmed identity, police reopened the investigation into Rebecca's disappearance. They interviewed her friends and family, piecing together the last hours of her life. Friends recalled that Rebecca had been acting normally in the days leading up to her disappearance. Witnesses reported seeing her at a local diner the night she vanished, where she had spoken briefly with an unidentified man. Another witness claimed to have seen her getting into a dark-colored pickup truck, but no one could recall the driver's face. One peculiar detail that stood out was that Rebecca had appeared unsettled the evening before her disappearance, but she hadn't shared any specific reason for her anxiety. Despite their efforts, investigators struggled to find conclusive leads. The wooded area where Rebecca's body was found was miles from town, making it unlikely that she had ended up there on her own. If she had been killed elsewhere and transported to the scene, someone had gone to great lengths to conceal her remains. The location itself was particularly puzzling, as it was not near any significant roads or easily accessible paths. It was as though someone had purposely hidden her body in this remote area, knowing that it would be nearly impossible for someone to find her unless they knew exactly where to look. Unfortunately, without any additional evidence or a confession, the case remained unsolved, and Rebecca's killer remained at large. The details of her tragic end, combined with the eerie symbolism of the wasp's nest, only deepened the mystery, making it all the more unsettling. The case lingered in the minds of investigators, and over time, the haunting nature of the crime became even more pronounced. Decades later, Rebecca Ann Collins' murder remains a chilling and unresolved mystery. The wasp's nest provided crucial information about when she had died, but it could not reveal the identity of her killer. Her family continues to hope that one day, new evidence will come to light, and justice will finally be served. Until then, her case remains open, a lingering question in the annals of unsolved crimes, a case that, despite all the years, refuses to fade away.